Hello, I'm Professor Kozlowski, and today we are contextualizing the Symposium. This lecture, whatever it turns out to be, is kind of the companion to our discussion in the Symposium itself for the Love and Friendship class. So if you're wondering why this is happening, that's why. We're doing some work on the Love and Friendship lectures in order to prepare for the online course, so yeah, that's the deal. What I want to talk about today is all of the context information you need in order to properly process the Symposium, at least going into the text for the first time. We'll talk about Socrates and his history in a different video. For now, what I kind of want to do is look at the basic structures of ancient Greek life, so we can talk about how they are represented and how they are challenged by Plato in the Symposium, because the Symposium is a ridiculously complicated book with a lot going on. And in order to properly understand what Plato is, reporting about his own time, as well as what Plato is sort of innovating about, we kind of got to know what the baseline here is. So there are two sort of things that I want to talk about most here. I want to talk about the family in ancient Greek society, the basic sexual dynamics that are going on in the average Greek estate, and then I want to talk about what the Symposium itself would have probably actually looked like. What would a party of this magnitude and scale actually have been if it wasn't populated by a bunch of philosophers who are interested in talking about, love instead of getting drunk and playing drinking games. So with that in mind, let's start with the family. This is a stela, I believe, or a duplication of a stela of some kind. I think it's being transferred at this particular point in time. It's one of the few Greek works that I've found that actually depict the whole family. Greeks, as a rule, don't put a very high premium on family and family values, not like we do today. And you'll notice that the family is actually over here. These two are probably either temple servants or possibly Asclepius himself. We are sacrificing a bull today, so the whole family has come out to sacrifice to Asclepius. Presumably somebody in the family is sick, and we are sacrificing to get them healed. Asclepius is sort of quasi the god of medicine here. It's complicated, not getting into it. What I want to talk about are the individual family members, their roles in the family, and how the dynamics work between them. So in the stela, you can see we've got the basic family set up here in ancient Greece. We've got Dad, who is, hanging out with the bull, getting ready to pay for this transaction. We've got Mom over here, who is taking care of the family. Notice that the two kids are both oriented around her. We've got what is likely a servant of the household, and what, for the purposes of our lecture, we're going to call a slave over here, taking care of the littlest one. I want to stress, though, that this is a big household, much bigger than even this image tends to represent. When I talk about a Greek family in a Greek household, we are usually talking about a wealthy Greek family, an upper-class Greek family, by which we mean a Greek citizen. And that means the main person we need to talk about here in order to understand the family is Dad. Dad has all the power in the family here, even more so than most other cultures. We're going to be talking about misogyny a lot in this class. Let me tell you, the Greeks are tough to beat as far as misogynists and awfully exploitative ancient cultures are concerned. Dad, as the head of the household, has all of the power in the family. He is absolute leader. He is the only one who has economic power. He is the only one who is considered to own land. He is the master of the family, as far as everyone is concerned. Now, that said, obviously we'll talk about the way that, people don't have power beneath him, but I also want to stress that he has a lot of responsibility that goes along with his role as head of the family. Not only is he the head of the household, and therefore, absolute dictator over everyone beneath him, but he does represent his family in all public affairs, as far as especially the Athenian world is concerned. He's the guy who goes to the demos and votes on behalf of his family, so he is, keeping that in mind and trying to protect his family members when the various politicians in Athens are making decisions that might advantage or disadvantage him. He is also required to fight for his family. As a citizen, he is also a soldier in the Athenian army and the Athenian navy. He will go to bat if his town or city or family is attacked. Consequently, as much as Dad has all this power, it is considered to be just in the Greek world. He does so much more than they do, at least as far as the Greeks are concerned. Like, there's literally a passage in Hesiod's Theogony, one of the foundational mythic texts for ancient Greece, that talks about how women are useless and don't do anything. They do nothing, they have no responsibilities, they perform no important acts for the household, and they just, like, sit and eat all of the guy's food and drink all of his booze. It is considered to be a very unequitable relationship. Dad has all the power, but Dad warrants all the power because Dad does all of the ugly responsibilities that are necessary to keep the family and the city safe from invaders and attackers. He is the one who, does all the hard work of making sure that the world, it protects his family. Now, again, we'll question this later, but for now, understand that that's the way that the Athenians understand the male role at the head of the family. Virtually all of the symposiasts, all of the men that we see in the Symposium, are in this role, or something close to it. The younger symposiasts, someone like maybe Phaedrus, could potentially not be the head of the household, could be just, the eldest son in another household. But again, you are going to be in the direct line from father to son if you are going to have any power whatsoever in Athenian society. Now, sexually speaking, Dad also has a great deal of sexual freedom. Yes, he is likely to sleep with Mom, but it is important to note that most of his relationships to Mom are going to be purely for the sake of begetting a son, because the son is going to inherit all of Dad's, estate, all of the household, and all of the political power and clout that Dad has. So Mom is an important part of the family, but Mom is not the only person that Dad is sleeping with, in all likelihood. We have only one wife. This is pretty normal in Greek society. Not much in the way of polygamy going on here. Not like you'll see in ancient Hebrew societies or, other ancient societies around the world. But, importantly, Dad probably has multiple female slaves that he sleeps with. He is maybe, taking advantage of the services of a hetera, which is like the Greek form of prostitute here. He may even be sleeping with young men, which we will talk about more when it comes to the Symposium. Dad has an active sexual life well outside of the household, is kind of what it comes down to. And this is, as far as the Greeks are concerned, perfectly acceptable. There's no reason why Dad needs to be absolutely faithful to Mom. This is not expected of him. He is going to sleep with basically anyone who he is attracted to. That is, one of the advantages of being so powerful and so wealthy and so accomplished here in Greek society. So, again, you'll notice that most of the symposiasts are waxing poetic about their relationships specifically to other men. In this Erastes Romanos dynamic, this pederastic relationship that, like I said, we'll talk about more elsewhere. This is the way that love, eros, as it's understood at this particular moment in history, works. Like, again, you're not attracted to your wife. You are married to her because of the economic considerations, because of the political considerations, because it is advantageous to your household. Dad is married to Mom and has sex with Mom out of a sense of duty, out of a sense of responsibility, not because he's necessarily really hot for her. This is normal in ancient societies, like across the board. Honestly, this is normal in medieval societies and modern societies as well. The idea of marriage being for love is kind of a recent development, or at least it's recent that marriage is for love, and also, it's widespread understood that marriage is for love. Love as a quality involved in the decision of, who is going to marry who is definitely being kicked around in some of the Greek myths, but it is not the norm. Typically, you marry the person you marry. Mom is Mom because of the way that she advantages the rest of the household and society, not because Dad is really, really into her. So with that in mind, let's talk about Mom. Again, marriage in ancient Greek society, just as across most ancient societies and well into the medieval and modern world, is for economic and political reasons. Here in ancient Greece, that boils down to alliances. Dad is trying to keep his household afloat, trying to protect his family and all the people who are beneath him, and one of the ways that he does that is by forging important alliances with other families, other political rivals, other people who hold specific relationships to him economically. So if in fact Dad is, say, selling wine, then maybe he's gonna be talking to, the guy who makes pots or has like the best pottery in the area, and he is going to want to forge an economic and political alliance with this person so that, they can ship his wine in this guy's pots, and this guy's pots will be worth more because it's shipping something valuable. So Dad, wants to make an alliance with this guy. He's going to marry this guy's daughter, which will shore up their relationship. Now, if Dad's family is threatened, so is, the pot guy's family, because the two families are now joined. You'll see this all throughout, like, Greek literature and Greek mythology as well. Like, you'll see this relationship, or this sort of relationship dynamic taking place in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Again, like, in order to protect your household, in order to ensure your economic advantage, you're going to partner with a household that has an important relationship to yours. You will bind your two houses together through this marriage. Now, again, you should note that the wife, like Mom, probably didn't have a whole lot of say in this. Mom's probably considerably younger than Dad in all likelihood, though that's not a huge thing here in the ancient Greek world. Like, it's not nearly as bad as we'll see in, say, the era of Mary Wollstonecraft. But broadly speaking, like, Mom and Dad are Mom and Dad, not because they love each other, but because it was advantageous to Dad and to Mom's family to get the two hitched, so the two of them can join the households and protect one another's backs. Now, Mom, now that she is Mom, has a lot of responsibilities in the household, more than, the ancient Greek men would tend to think. Again, that image of, like, the drones that just eat and drink all of Dad's shit is not accurate. Like, Mom actually is basically the leader of the women in the household. She is the one responsible for making sure that the household runs smoothly, that there is water, that there is wine, that, like, parties are well executed and everybody has enough to drink and everybody has a good time. But, importantly, Mom is protected. Dad needs to make absolutely sure that Mom isn't sleeping with anyone else on the side. Now, again, like, you might immediately jump to the conclusion, hey, why is that fair? Like, Mom doesn't get to sleep around, but Dad gets to sleep with whoever he wants to? Yes, this is absolutely true, and the Greeks do not see any problem with this, specifically because Mom is Mom because she has to make children for Dad. Since Dad's bloodline is the one that controls this household, controls the estate, and therefore has a really important economic stake in the community, Mom needs to give Dad legitimate blood heirs to inherit Dad's power and responsibility so the line will continue unbroken. If Mom is sleeping around with Dad's pot-selling friend, then that means that we don't know who little eldest son Johnny or whoever is actually the son of, and consequently the integrity of the family is damaged, the entire economic system falls apart. So Mom is not only protected by Dad, Mom is not allowed to leave the estate unless Dad or one of the other men is with her. This is part of the reason why you never see the entire family depicted in ancient Greek society. Like, if you're looking at pots, it's probably going to be either all women or all men. Rarely ever are you going to see, like, men and women mingling, except in, like, a non-familial relationship. And even more rarely will you see the kids hanging around. Again, Mom's responsibility is to stay at home, to protect her chastity, to only sleep with Dad, to guarantee that every child she bears is his direct heir, and consequently she is very restricted in her movements. Like, even when we look at the way that the household is divided, Mom has her own quarters and she is not allowed to leave them. She will walk around the estate, she'll go get water, she'll go to the well, she'll hang out in the courtyard, she'll take care of responsibilities with other women, but she is fiercely protected from the other men on the estate, and she is absolutely not allowed in society unless she is accompanied by one of the men from the estate who Dad can trust. Her primary goal, her primary responsibility in the family is to ensure that unbroken lineage to the next generation. Make sure that Dad has a true-blooded son who will take over all of the family responsibilities. So with that in mind, let's talk about our eldest son here. Again, like Dad, he is one day going to be the master of the estate. He is going to be the person on whom the entire estate relies. All the servants, all the slaves, all the women, all of them are one day going to depend on him, and consequently he has the most responsibility after Dad here. He is essentially in charge of the household when dad is away, either because dad is fighting in a war or because dad is, in another city making trade arrangements or whatever. He's going to be in charge. Like we see this with Telemachus and Odysseus in, the Odyssey, a model that hasn't changed much by the time that we get to ancient Greek or classical Greek society as we see here, even though hundreds of years have transpired at this point. It's complicated, not getting into it. Likewise, dad needs to make sure that our eldest son is ready to take on those responsibilities. So dad is going to go out of his way to make sure his eldest son is educated. He's going to bring in tutors to do that, which we'll talk about that more when we get to Socrates. It's possible that our eldest son will get lent out to other families at times, either because, it's a greater family relationship, this is a way of establishing trust between, dad's side of the family and mom's side of the family. So, our eldest son will get lent over to mom's father in order to ensure that, this father is, fond of the boy and therefore can have a positive relationship with him going forward. You'll also see that he gets lent into other families for the same kind of relationships that we see with the arranged marriages. We're going to, lend our other neighbor the son for a month or two, and they're going to get close, and therefore, they will also protect us. Again, part of this is to make sure that the eldest son is ready to take over for his dad's responsibilities, making sure that he also is an important pillar of the community, as well as just making him, a piece of the political game here. One of the things about having kids in the ancient Greek world is it's not a guarantee that they're going to survive to adulthood. So while this definitely refers to the eldest son, we should notice that younger children are also on the docket here. Whoever our little baby is, if he is male, there's a decent chance that he too will get educated just in case something goes awry between now and the eldest son taking over responsibilities of the household. Now, daughters are not important. We're just going to throw that out there. Daughters are primarily important for the same reason that mom is important, to make a political alliance. So we need to make sure that the daughter is protected, make sure that she doesn't have contact with other men, make sure that her virginity is intact, and that way we can marry her off advantageously into another household, guaranteeing political alliances, guaranteeing economic alliances, whatever the case may be. Whatever daughters we have here, they are entirely going to be reserved for these sorts of advantages. They do not have a sort of independent worth in their own right. Again, sorry ladies, this is a super misogynistic society. The one advantage here is that it is rarely going to get worse than this. Again, the ancient Greeks are super misogynistic as these things go, even more than many of the other societies we're going to talk about. But that said, I do want to spend some time talking about both the servants and the slaves here, because there is a difference in Greek society. And as much as it's not going to factor too much into the symposium, it's worthwhile to have that context to understand everything that's going on behind the scenes. So, for example, in this first section, you'll notice that Eryximachus, requests that they dismiss the flute girls at one point. The flute girls are slaves, and likely are hanging around for sexual reasons. Yeah, they play the flute pretty good, I guess, but really this is supposed to get more exciting as the party goes on. Servants, by contrast, are in fact free-born members of Athenian society, but you'll notice that they're not citizens. They do not have voting rights, they do not own land, they do not, have an independent existence outside of the estate. Freeborn servants will probably spend all of their lives on this estate and be basically considered part of the household. They will, have a generational passing down of responsibilities from father to son, just like dad does, but they're not in charge of the household. These are some of the people that dad is responsible for when he goes to war or when he goes to the demos. So they are under the protection of the citizen father who is in charge of the whole estate. Now, these freeborn servants, if they make enough money, could buy their own land and become independently wealthy and could become citizens in their own right. But they don't become citizens until they own land and are recognized by the community. So some of these servants will aspire to that, some of them won't. They're perfectly happy letting dad take control of the entire estate. But they are in a different role than the slaves. The slaves are a completely different, political entity here. Slaves have no power, they have no freedom, they are not, independent in any respect. They are legitimately owned by dad as part of the estate, much like the household, much like the property. And this is basically how the ancient Greek society understands slaves, as effectively property. Now, it's a little more complicated than that. Like, we're used to thinking of slaves in the model of, like, North American slavery, which is actually really oppressive and awful, way worse than the ancient Athenians have slaves anyway. Like, arguably, it's more on par with the way the Spartans do things, but we'll talk about that in its own time as well. As far as the Athenians go, slaves are property, but they're also, like, recognized as human beings, and consequently, like, yes, they serve in the household, and they serve at the father's behest. Some of these slaves, especially the pretty women slaves, will probably turn out to be concubines, and dad is going to sleep with them when it's, entertaining for him to do so. Any bastards born to them will probably not be recognized unless something happens to the primary line through the wife. But at any rate, these concubines are not mistreated as a rule. Like, yes, it is dad's prerogative to beat them and possibly even kill them under certain circumstances, but as a rule, dad is going to be responsible to the community if he starts killing slaves. So dad does not want to do this. The slaves are protected in some respect, in a way that they just aren't in North American society. So, again, the slaves have an important sexual role in the family. They have an important role in the estate at large. But these slaves are also possibly able to free themselves. If they make enough money or if they earn the goodwill of the family, they can become servants and they can be, acknowledged as freeborn just as any other servant was. So as much as the flute girls that we see being dismissed are slaves and are probably expected to have sex with the men at their discretion, it's noteworthy that they aren't, entirely just property. They have a sort of intermediary role above, the pots and the stuff in the house, but below the freeborn servants who do in fact have a certain amount of control over their own lives, even if they are indebted to dad and the estate for their well-being and their livelihood. So with that in mind, let's talk about the way the house works. The symposium itself would take place in the andron, which is literally like the Greek word for man room. This is a sort of reconstruction of what the andron would have probably looked like. And you can figure that this is roughly on par with what we're seeing in the symposium. Notice we've got these, like, long couches. The Greeks would typically recline on one elbow, like they would lie on their side, recline on one elbow, and have, like, the other hand free to, take food and drink from the tables that are hanging around. Typically you can fit 2 men on each one of these little couch thingies. This would have been normal. This is what's going on in the symposium that we talk about. You notice that Agathon is really eager to have Socrates, like, join him on his couch. There is a sexual dimension here. Like, we shouldn't ignore that in the symposium. Clearly, Agathon has designs on Socrates beyond just, hey, it's nice to talk, and if we're close together, your wisdom will flow into me the way that it's suggested. In general, though, like, you'll notice that this could be sexual, it could be non-sexual. It totally doesn't matter. The Greeks are open-minded here. Like, there are no actual rules for who you are hanging out with. You'll notice that in our symposium, the discussions, the speeches, proceed in a clockwise fashion around the room. Usually the host is going to be in the one nearest to the door, and consequently, like, everyone leading up to the host is in a position of greater or lesser, like, recognition by the host, a position of greater or lesser honor, depending on how close to the host they actually are. So you figure, like, Phaedrus is probably here, Pausanias is probably here, Eryximachus and Aristophanes are probably on some of the couches over here, and then of course we've got Agathon and Socrates, and eventually newcomer Alcibiades, spoiler alert, over on, like, the farthest couch. Typically symposia feature 7 to 9 couches depending on the size of the room. Chances are Agathon's richer than we are seeing here. He's probably got the full suite of 9 couches and therefore a larger room, possibly with a big bonfire or something in the center. It depends on the layout of the room, the layout of the house. At any rate, like, this is one of the main rooms, and you'll notice that it is specifically for men. The only women who are allowed in here are when they are serving, usually from the kitchen. And notice that the kitchen, like, opens onto the andron very conveniently. Women, as a rule, are going to be hanging out in the gynaeceum instead, the literally lady room. And this includes the female slaves, the female servants, just as like the daughters and the mother and in the household. Like all of the women will spend their time there. Just as the men hang out together, the women hang out together, and ne'er the twain shall meet. Because again, you don't want to risk your wife possibly getting together with one of your friends and therefore, polluting the bloodline and possibly bringing into question whether or not your children are actually yours. So all of our symposium, all of the activities should be like pictured when you were reading this and taking place in a room like this one. Now, the business of the symposium itself usually is a lot of drinking. Like, this is a legit 5th century kylix. This is not just, a depiction of what a symposium would look like, but this is literally on the kind of, cup that a person at a symposium would drink. The kylix itself we'll talk about in a moment when we get a better picture of it. But for now, what I want to stress is, usually for a symposium, this is about getting totally wasted, playing silly drinking games, and basically celebrating Dionysus, the god of wine. It's noteworthy that when Plato when Plato is describing how, Eryximachus pitches the idea of, hey, let's, not drink because we're already totally hungover from last night's drinking because we're in the middle of this big festival, which, we're now celebrating Agathon because he won the tragedy. Usually the symposium is not like a whole bunch of erudite intellectuals getting together to talk about philosophy. This is very much an invention of Plato's, which, tracks with Socrates' track record and also the kind of guys that we're dealing with here. It wouldn't have been impossible. But again, more likely is all these guys are going to get together. They're all going to get completely shit-faced. And they are going to just do nothing but drink for the entire evening, with the possible exception of this getting into more exciting sexual territory. Again, the flute girls are here for more than just playing the flute, I should stress. A symposium is basically just a party. As much as we use the fancy Greek word here, this is not far removed from, contemporary parties and the way that contemporary parties are understood to work. Just because everybody's sitting down and talking about philosophy doesn't mean that this is normal in Greek society. As a rule, as much as we tend to hold the Greeks up on a pedestal and talk about how, enlightened and democratic and how they're the foundation of Western society and so on and so forth, this is all nonsense. The ancient Greeks were, at the end of the day, society as imagined by a bunch of frat boys or 13-year-old boys. There's a reason why frat houses take Greek letters as their inspiration. These guys were very misogynistic. They were all about power plays and power dynamics. They were, all horny all the time. This is not necessarily an enlightened way to govern one's society as much as democracy is kind of a big deal. The symposium was a horny teenage party, in short, even when you're not necessarily horny teenagers. As much as the symposium we're reading about with Plato features, older men, that could probably be part of the reason why they're less interested in drinking and sex than the average symposium tends to be. But that said, again, this is not necessarily a smart thing. When I talked about drinking games, you'll notice, over here, this girl is, she's got her own kylix, and she's got it, wrapped around her one finger. This is probably because this was itself, one of the major drinking games that we see at the symposia. You can see, this dude is apparently not just two-handing it, but he's got, his one kylix in his hand, just as the woman did. Our best guess is that this was, a kind of a drinking game. The kylixes that we're seeing here, they all look roughly like this one does. They're fairly shallow, as far as the bowl thing is concerned. And the idea is that you, put the lip of the kylix on your mouth and you tip it up over your face to drink it. The wine at this particular point in history is not great. There is a lot of sediment in the wine, and the kylix is designed so that there's the whole cup part of the kylix goes down and has a little basin here at the bottom. That's what this is. This is actually the center of the kylix, the deepest part of the kylix. And at least part of the fun of drinking from a kylix is that you get to find out what the picture is at the bottom of the kylix, in this case, this dude. Additionally, the drinking game here, because there's so much crud in the wine, because there's so much sediment, it collects in the basin here, and then it's a usual drinking game at these things that you balance it on your fingers like this, and you flick the sediment at the wall. And oftentimes you'll have like pictures on the wall that you can like target. So one of the drinking games is like flip the wine shit at the wall and see who gets closest to the guy's face or something. Again, this is not terribly mature. This is all very silly. The other thing that you'll notice is that like as you tip the rim of the Kylix up to your lips, the other half of the Kylix is going to like cover up your face, so it's a fun game to like put eyes or a giant mustache on the Kylix, so when you tip it up over your face it looks like you have these big eyes and a mustache or something. Again, this is not necessarily a sophisticated society, folks, much as we get really excited about them. Again, like, the main thing that I want to stress here is, as much as the Symposium is presented as this intellectual, philosophical thing, you should also recognize that Plato was riffing on the drunken party that this would likely have been based on. And by the end of this book, you'll notice that the Greeks are, foregoing their original plans and getting pretty drunk, and things get a little sexual, and, it is silly and ridiculous and occasionally just downright stupid. So I hope you've enjoyed our little introduction to, like, Greek society and the Symposium in general. We'll talk about it more in other lectures as we get into the more philosophical side of it, but hopefully this gives you a better sense of understanding, like, how the Greek family works, how the Greek parties work, all that fun stuff. We'll talk about the rest soon enough.